Welcome to Up Close and Personal. I'm Scott Sexsmith. If you've watched this show over the last several months, you'll know that we've been fortunate enough to spend some time with some of the biggest names in media in our country. The likes of Ron MacLean, Steve Paikin, and of course, the legendary Lloyd Robertson. Today is no exception, other than it's what I would like to call a media titan times two. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by two of my favorites, former host of The National on CBC, among other things, Wendy Mesley, and former Toronto morning radio host, Maureen Holloway. Welcome, both of you, to Up Close and Personal.
Hey, Scott.
Okay, full disclosure, I'm a huge fan of both of you. Wendy, loved watching you on the national undercurrents and marketplace. You're an extremely talented journalist, and we as a nation have been very fortunate to have you keep us informed over the years. And Mo, entertainer, comedian, and huge radio talent. You've worked on some of the biggest stations in our country. And as a former radio guy myself, I used to listen religiously to CHFI and you and Darren in the morning. It's a thrill to be able to share some time with you guys here today.
We both started in radio. We both had the same job in radio 1,000 years ago. Yeah, back at CKFM. We were like traffic reporters. Woohoo!
So lots to cover today, of course, the launch of the new podcast that the two of you are hosting called the Women of Ill Repute, and we'll get to that shortly. I'd like to start, if we can, by maybe taking a step back and talking about your careers and how we got to where we are today. So you've both attained the status that I would call moguls of media here in Canada. I'm curious...
Oh, dear. I'm a mogul.
You are a mogul. I'm curious how each of you chose the profession that you did, and perhaps who influenced you to do it, and maybe who mentored you along the way. Maureen, if we can start with you.
Well, I didn't actually want to I wanted to get into advertising. I had an undergrad in film studies, and I sort of wandered around in the dark, wondering what to do. And then I was being interviewed by an ad agency in Toronto, and they said, "Do you have any technical skills?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Well, you should try the radio and television arts program." And I love school, so I thought, sure, I'll go get another degree. It allows you to put off real life. And so I went to Ryerson and got hired by CKFM as a summer job as a cottage country as a boat reporter. Back when radio stations had big budgets,
yes, they
had a boat that tooled around the Toronto harbor. And so they hired me to say, hey, come on down to the waterfront. This is what's going on. And they had hired a young engineering student to captain the boat, and I married him. So that was a good summer. And then they offered me a full-time job in the fall. And so I dropped out of school to do traffic at CKFM. So yeah, it was kind of an accident. I didn't really plan to be a radio personality. I thought I was going to be a creative director.
And the boat reporter is the best gig in the business.
They don't do it anymore, but I'll tell you, certainly when I was doing it, it was the best gig in the business. There's a really hot guy piloting the boat around, and it's the best summer of my life.
Wendy, what about you?
Well, in those days, I was grade 13, and I had no idea what I was going to do, except I did well-ish in school, so I was going to go off and get a degree and figure things out. And then I met my dad, which is a long story, who didn't raise me, but I met him, and he was a journalist. And I told my mom and I happened to get a job because at my high school, they put up a poster saying, hey, we need people to answer the phones at Chum. And I thought, well, that's better than scrubbing dishes in the restaurant where I'm working. So I went there. So all of these things came together. Mark Daly would come in and do a 1-minute newscast. And I thought, this is so cool. And Barbara Frum was really my inspiration growing up. We used to listen to her all the time on the radio. I thought, I'm going to be a journalist. And my mom thought, oh, this is all because she's met her dad. So I have to send her to a psychiatrist because this is a big problem. So she worked at the hospital and set me up with a psychiatrist there. And he said, nah, it's whatever. She can make a success out of whatever. So I went off and did that. And I went to Ryerson and I worked at radio jobs part-time. And then that led to a TV job. And yeah, so it wasn't a plan. I was going to have a very serious job. And instead I ended up going into journalism where, it's probably not a real degree, but and I that's a long story too. I didn't quite get the degree. I failed advanced reporting in third year, but here I am. I'm a mogul now.
You are. I think you did okay. You've both had what I would call some significant milestones in your career. Maureen, can you tell me when you learned that you'd be replacing Aaron, of course, Aaron Davis on the CHFI morning show? Tell me about that moment, not only replacing an icon in the business, but for you being on yet another iconic station, because you've been on a few.
Well, I've had three jobs. I was at Standard Broadcasting, which is now Bell, at CKFM, which became Mix, which is now Virgin, for 17 years. And then I was at Q107 for 15 years. And I was at CHFI for just under 5. So those are the three stations that I've been on, as well as this, I guess, for lack of a better word, syndicated feature that I did for years across the country at all the stations. So I've been on dozens and dozens of stations, but I've only really had 3 gigs, if that makes sense. So with Aaron in particular, I had moved to afternoons at Q, which is a long story there. We might touch on it later. So I was doing afternoons. I'm not an afternoon personality. I'm an actor and a reactor. I work with other people.
Right.
I sitting there doing 20-second back sells of classic rock tunes is not my forte. There are people who do it really well. That wasn't me. So I was really unhappy. And I knew that Erin was leaving. I knew her daughter had died and she'd come back to work with Darren. And I knew that she was unhappy. We weren't close. We'd become closer. And my husband works for Rogers in a completely different, he works in real estate. He's the cute guy from the boat, by the way, just bringing him back into the narrative. He's certainly come in handy. And he said, you know that Erin's leaving. That's the scuttlebutt at Rogers. And I was like, oh my God, she's leaving? Like really, like by choice, leaving, packing up, moving. Yep. So I called Julie Adam up. Julie Adam is the head of radio at Rogers. And I said, is it true that Erin's leaving and would you be looking to replace her? And I think they hired me 2 days later.
Wow.
So, and with Erin's full approval. And I can't tell you how important that was. Like she was so beloved and so many people would have been absolutely dismayed and opposed to me taking that job if she hadn't made it clear that she thought this was a great choice, and she was enormously supportive. And so I stepped into her enormously big shoes and was there for almost 5 years.
You brought up Q107. Is that something that you want to talk about, or would you rather park that?
Talking about that seems to be a full-time job these days. I will. I was one of the women. I was one of them, probably for the longest time, exposed to John's abuse. But because I didn't work in the studio with him for a long time, I was working from home because I was doing hits on stations across the country. I wasn't exposed to the toxicity of being physically in the same room until they asked me to come on full time. And when I did, it was obvious to me that this wasn't a healthy place to work, but that he was a bully. And not only did he didn't bully me that much. I think it was a respect thing, but he certainly treated the 2 guys that work with him, one especially, was abusive. And he was only abusive to me maybe 2 or 3 times in the 15 years that I was with him. But it was violent, emotionally violent, and unacceptable, and it was brutal, and he was like that. So, I mean, it wasn't an isolated case, but because he's supremely talented and we had fantastic chemistry and he was making a lot of money for the station and a lot of money for himself, it was allowed to slide for years. And when I got out largely because of that. That's why they moved me to afternoons. In case anybody wants to know I did not kill Kim Mitchell, who was doing the afternoons, although he did have a heart attack later. And I did have people say, you took Kim Mitchell's job and he had a heart attack. I was like, these are not exactly the things that happened. But I can see why somebody might think that. But really, I was just trying to get away from a really really unfortunate situation, which surfaced.
Wendy, let's flip to you if we can for a second. Anchoring a national newscast is a huge responsibility. Can you describe to me the moment that became a reality and maybe the first time you sat down behind that desk and what went through your mind?
Well, the first time I did a newscast in front of a microphone was back when I was a child at CKFM, and I was terrified of the microphone. So I'd gotten over that. But then I was occasionally, 20 years later, I was filling in on the National, reading the news for the first time. And we used to be in the old building where like maggots fell from the ceiling before we moved to the new building. And what were it was Rusty and whatever the puppets were hanging up just behind the puppets for not Mr. Dress Up, but
the Friendly Giant.
Whatever. That's right.
Yeah,
Yes.
Rusty,
So those
Rusty
puppets,
and Jerome.
Rusty and Jerome. Yeah, so they were hanging up in the back of the studio, and you tried to like treat it like what you're doing was serious. So I went in to fill in one night, and it was like 1990 or something. And it was the night that the Gorbachev government, there was a mutiny and he fell. So I did the newscast, and it was all like terrifying, but I'd been a reporter for a long, long, long time at that point. So it was okay. And I was driving home, and it's 11:30 or whatever. And I get this call saying, the Russian government or the Soviet Union government has fallen. You need to come back immediately. So I whipped the car around, went straight to studio. I still had makeup and hair sort of on. And Don Murray was in Moscow, and I talked to Don Murray. We had no other, and they kept like throwing wire copy at me, and that was fine. But oh my God, I was terrified. And we managed to get through it. And they kept saying, "Oh yeah, no, the script is coming. The script is coming." And it's like 10 minutes to air. It's 5 minutes to air. It's 1 minute to air, and there was no script. So it was just like, this is what happened off the top of my head because I'm such an expert on Russian politics. Not, and Don Murray is going to be with us, I hope. And then off we went, and somehow we all survived. But I still have dreams, like now, in my advanced age of trying to find the studio, and it's 1 minute to, and I'm trying to get there, and there's no script, and my hair. I don't have the naked for exam thing, but I do have the National is on in 30 seconds, and I gotta be there. So yeah, that was the first time. And then after that, it, sometimes it would get a little boring. I'd play like little games in my head of how many tracks can I have going at the same time so that I can think about what I'm reading that I've read before. Because as an anchor at CBC anyway, you see everything and you're involved in everything before it actually happens, unless it's a moving story or a breaking story or an election or something huge has happened. But otherwise, you've seen the scripts. And so I'm reading the script, and then I start thinking about something else. And then another track is thinking, well, you should stop thinking about that. And then wouldn't it be fun that maybe I could test this out and think on a fourth track? No, that would be ridiculous. Let's go back to the track. So it went from absolute terror to boredom of reading a script that was not always interesting. But the moving parts, like elections still till the very end, terrified me because there was just so much information and you had to be on the ball. So it's still good to be scared, I think, just not all the time.
Absolutely. Many who have worked in media also suffer the fate of being exited at one time or another. Wendy, your departure from CBC created some headlines across the country. Can you share the details surrounding that and perhaps where CBC got it wrong?
Well, I found it so interesting what Maureen was just saying about how wouldn't it be great if the executives in radio could come forward and say, we have an issue. So CBC for years, and you can argue this either way, for years had a diversity problem, had an issue with famous people, successful people not being amazing or saying questionable things and not dealing with it because they were important, and not dealing with the diversity thing because of all kinds of reasons. So I think I kind of got thrown under the bus a bit by my employers when a moment came along where what happened was that it was right after the murder of George Floyd. By the police in the States. And I was doing a show called The Weekly, and I was on a phone call with a bunch of other producers, all of whom knew me quite well and were very supportive throughout what happened afterwards, except for one person who was brought in as a freelancer, didn't know me, and was sort of tired of all of the diversity problems at CBC. And so what happened was we were planning a panel on what had happened to journalism, or how the racism issue was being covered in Canada. by journalists. And I was so upset that somebody who was going to be on our panel, she ultimately wasn't, but I was so upset that she had told us and put out on Twitter how she was repeatedly called the N-word. And I was like outraged by this, and I wanted to talk about this. And unfortunately, on the phone call, not on the show, because this was a Thursday before the show, I used the whole word, the N word. I used the whole word, and I hurt people. And it didn't, the phone call went silent, and I realized, oh my God, I guess I shouldn't have said that. And I apologized. And then I apologized publicly afterwards, after the CBC had said that I was being investigated and I was being taken off the show. I publicly apologized as well. But instead of it, instead of my being punished, and forgiven, because I think I should have been, I never in a million years would ever call anybody that. Yeah. And I never meant to hurt anybody with that. And I apologized, but I shouldn't have used the word. And so that's why I apologized. But instead of being forgiven, I was basically used to absolve the CBC of all of its sins. And it was just timing, and I believe in change. I've fought that's what upset me, is that I'd been at CBC for almost 40 years, for 4 decades. And I'd fought really hard to fight for underdogs and be a good reporter. And I basically got tossed. So I think that was a little extreme in the end. So yeah, I wish that others had sort of taken responsibility, or not used me as the one example of alleged racism at CBC.
Mo, you co-hosted the morning show on CHFI from 2017 to October of 2021. Can you talk about your departure from Rogers?
Sure.
Oh, joy. This is fun times here, Scott.
It's only going to get better. Trust me, this is a build-up.
Yeah, I may have signed something, but that doesn't hold up, right? So,
I may have signed the same thing.
Yeah. So I was doing the show with Darren B. Lamb, and we were doing really well, actually. And then the pandemic came along, and we were working from home, and which was awkward, but we worked it out. And then in February of 2020, Darren went on vacation and they didn't come back. It just didn't come back. And we asked everybody, management, what's going on? And they were like, we don't know. He's just not coming back. And so they decided then that we had a new program director who said, okay, listen, who would you like to work with? And I was like, okay, so think about it. Give me a dream list of who you'd like to work with. So I thought, all right, Darren's gone. He's not coming back. He wasn't the easiest person to work with. We had great chemistry, but that's my job, is to have chemistry with whoever I work with. But I was like, okay, fine. So I kind of came up with a few names, and they said, oh no, never mind. And yeah, but in the meantime, we'll pull Mike Cooper out of retirement and put him in with you in the meantime. And I'm like, well, what's the long-term plan? And they're like, we don't really have one, but we'll put Mike in with you in the meantime. So it was Mike and me and Ian MacArthur and Gord Rennie and Christine Cardoso. So a little group of 5. And we didn't know what the future held, but you know what? We did some really good radio.
The Women of Ill Repute. Whose idea was it? How did it come together? Who called who? Give me all the gossip.
Wendy came up with the idea. Actually, Wendy's husband and daughter came up with the idea. And I was passing through. Wendy lives in Prince Edward County, and John and I were coming back from Quebec. And we stopped. It was at New Year's, and just between Christmas and New Year's. And Wendy said, hey, I have an idea. And she had the title and everything, and I thought the title was both cheeky, adorable, and confusing. But yeah, and she said, why don't we just talk to fabulous women who do whatever the hell they want, and we'll call it Women of Ill Repute, and we'll get Jane Fonda and Dolly Parton. And I was like, wow, okay, maybe. And I do remember saying to you, Wendy, I mean, we'd had a few glasses of wine and it was the holidays, but I do remember saying to you, this isn't as easy as you think it is. It's not a matter of just putting on a show because your dad has a barn. First of all, you have to have a dad and he has to have a barn. So it took us a couple of months to get it off the ground. We found Matt Kundle, Sound Off Productions, who is our technical guy and has been invaluable. We have a fantastic photographer friend of Wendy's, Belgraver, who did our photography. A fantastic web designer named Tori Chippendale, because the website, we didn't know how important a website would be. Putting together a good website is a whole task unto itself.
Yeah.
And Wendy can take over here. We realized we need to get some guests.
Yeah, well, I used to be a political reporter, and it would be really hard to get the information, and you chase it all down yourself, and that would be one thing. And then I became a host and started interviewing, like big names, like Idris Elba's in town or whatever. Why don't we do Idris Elba? But we would have people like at the CBC or at CHFI. You would have like a producer. You would have somebody who would, maybe at CHFI they would want to come on because they wouldn't be expecting any nasty questions. Where with me, sometimes there'd be the odd nasty question, especially when I worked at Marketplace and everybody was bad.
Right.
Everything was going to kill you. But yeah, the whole chase thing was so difficult because it turns out that I haven't even approached Jane Fonda yet because I don't know, like, why would she want to come on something that doesn't even exist? We sort of, after the effects of the alcohol wore off, we realized that maybe this was going to be a little bit more difficult. And I'm not sure I ever pitched Dolly Parton. I mean, she's my dream, but I have trouble imagining her as a woman of ill repute. In spite of the silicone, I just, I think that's pushing it. But any excuse, I think, but we didn't exist. And so it turned out to be quite difficult to talk people into coming on our show. So we've ended up getting lots of what I would call Canadian famous people. So that, you'll go on the website and you'll see, oh, you're talking to Marie Hennon, who's like a famous lawyer, or you're talking to Jan Arden, or you're talking to Jody Wilson-Raybould, or you like names that'll be familiar to people.
Right.
But even finding them, and talking to them, because, you go through agents or you go through publicists and they're all like, I don't know, I'll get back to you. So yeah, it's been a lot of work. And then we are two Miss Bossy Pants, so we had to work that out too.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. They are a ton of work. We launched one here about 9 weeks ago that we do every week. And it's a grind every week to get the guests and get it together and hit the deadline. So I know exactly what you're talking about. It is not easy to do this podcast thing.
No, it isn't. And yet, to get back to an earlier question where you said, what would you tell to young people who are looking to get into journalism or radio? It is so much. A podcast is okay. Anyone can make a podcast. Not anyone can make a good podcast.
Right.
But it has made journalism and interviewing and accessible to everybody. If you really want to do this, you can do this. It's not going to be easy, but anybody can have a podcast. And this is where everyone that I know, certainly my kids and their friends, they listen to podcasts. They don't listen to radio.
No.
They listen to podcasts. And so as hard as it's the new medium. It's the new medium for journalists, especially. So yeah, we're glad to be part of it. It's just a lot more work than we thought.
Yeah, I think everybody in journalism is now going into podcasts, and I find that that's what I listen to as well. But it's got to be like, time is precious, and I think listening to a podcast is sort of like listening to radio. It's you're accepting a friend into your life. And so I'm finding that some of the most interesting people are on podcasts. But I'm not interested in blather. I'm not, there has to be some meat, or there has to be, a few chuckles. There has to be something where I actually want to spend time with those people.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Eating chuckles.
Mo, you said recently on another podcast, I believe it was with Terry DeMonte, that Wendy wants to be funny and you want to be more earnest. How's that working out?
I hate that word.
She hates that word. She hates the word earnest. I hate the word panties. Which don't usually happen in the same sentence. Uh, Wendy loves comedians as most people do and wants to be funny. And it is funny. Like Wendy is funny. Although I would argue that a sense of humor is not the ability to tell a joke, but to get a joke. And Wendy gets it. I don't want to be earnest, but I have to say that the women that we've been talking to, I've really enjoyed, like talking to Jody Wilson-Raybould. I just listened to the episode last night. And I would never have this conversation in my old gig or be privy to meeting such remarkable people as a radio morning show host or comedian. So there's something to be said for a glimpse into Wendy's previous world. And I know that Wendy's having a good time just, shooting the shit with these fabulous babes. So
letting it all hang out, man.
Yeah. So we didn't even really know that this was going to be the intersection in which we would meet, but it is. And it's, I think it's a good place to be.
Yeah, it's sort of, we were trying to figure out, while we were doing the show, we figured out a lot of things, and we should probably go back and fix them, only we won't. But we tried to figure out, is this a comedy show or is this an interview show? And yeah, it's kind of both. So yeah, there are moments where it's very serious and people cry or they, expose things or they get angry. But there's also lots of chuckles, and Maureen and I are reading lots of books, and we get to choose the people. That's the best part. So we would only choose people that, like, to me, the Women of Ill Repute, being called a woman of ill repute is a compliment. So it has to, and I am not a woman of ill repute because of what happened to me, and Mo is not a woman of ill repute because of what happened to her. We're just kind of women who look at the world a little bit sideways, and anyone who's fought for anything, I think, is a woman of ill repute. And you'd be amazed at how many people, even some who are saying, I'm not sure I want to be on a podcast, are saying, I'm a woman of ill repute. I want to come on. I want to talk about that. So it's, yeah.
The two of you share a common thread that, frankly, no two people should share, yet sadly too many do. You're both cancer survivors.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about your journeys?
Well, they were practically simultaneous, like so many things in our lives have been. We didn't know each other particularly well, but I would see Wendy across the waiting room at Princess Margaret because we had the same doctor. So it happened within a year. Our mothers died within a year. I mean, we've had so many strange coincidences, but that one in particular, it happened to me 17 years ago. And it was a very rare form of cancer, and I wasn't given a prognosis, which is scary. And not knowing is awful. And here I am 17 years later. I mean, my journey, as we're encouraged to call it, isn't very different from any other woman who's been given a serious diagnosis or a diagnosis of a serious illness. But it's in my past, and it brought with it some strange gifts. In a way, it made me a lot less fearful. I was never particularly fearful, but after that and childbirth, you're like, I can do anything now. Right. And it made me appreciate, it sounds sappy, but the smaller things, I mean, I had some shitty things happen to me afterwards, but that was a biggie, and it does shift you, and not in a bad way. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. No. But and also the listeners, I went public with it, and I worked throughout treatment. I went public in Toronto, Montreal, not with the other station out west. Nothing against them, but I just didn't want to talk about it all the time. And the listeners, I remember Marilyn Dennis, who's a dear friend who's also on our show, said, "Hey, Holloway, good career move."
Well, I got the hair.
Yeah, I love it. It's such an outpouring of support from listeners that, I couldn't possibly respond to them all, but it was really heartening and wonderful. And I ended up connecting with people in a way that I probably wouldn't have when I was just that sort of snide, sarcastic person I was up until then. I still am that person, though.
Yeah, well, I think that was the part that bothered me, is that I don't know. I guess in some ways it did change me in terms of I was like, let's go on that holiday now, or let's not pay the mortgage. We have a 6-year-old, let's just go on holidays. I was given a prognosis that I had a very, very small but very aggressive cancer. And then they found a second tumor, which was not great. So, but anyway, that was 16, 17 years later. So I'm still here, but I was expecting I was going to live. And it really pissed me off how, and this gets back into the whole, is it a gift idea? It pissed me off how people thought that it would make you a different person. And I, I, I found it very upsetting for people to say, well, now you understand the meaning of life. And I was like, screw you. Like, I understood the meaning of life before. I didn't need cancer. If I had my druthers, I'd be just as good or just as bad a person not having had cancer. So, you don't get a personality transplant with your lumpectomy or your mastectomy or whatever your chemotherapy. So I sort of pushed back against that because I felt a lot of people sort of wanted to pat me on the head and say, oh, now you understand the meaning of life. And no, I mean, the meaning of life is to just fucking live it, like whether you've got cancer or you don't. So
Right. I appreciate you both sharing those stories. I know it's hard. We've all been affected by it. And Mo, I know you in particular, and likely Wendy, you as well, are both heavily involved in charitable work. Where that's concerned.
It's really important, I think, to give back, but at some point you got to get on with your life. So for a couple of years, I did as Maureen did. I tried to help out, and I made sure to raise enough money for the Ride to Conquer Cancer to cover my treatments. I actually asked them how much my treatments would cost. My mom did it when I was going through treatment, and then I did it a year later, and I did a bunch of fundraisers and whatever. And then at some point, I just thought, you know what? Got to get on with my life. You can't be like Cancer Girl forever, unless you're dying. And I'm not dying at the moment. So but it's a tricky thing. And people sure do benefit from all the people who do help out. So I think I'm glad that I was able to contribute, but I can't devote my whole life to that, even though some people do and should be very much applauded for that.
Would either one of you return to traditional media if the right opportunity was presented to you?
No.
Did you want to think about that, Wendy, for a second?
I don't know. I mean, maybe there's something wonderful, but no.
Okay.
I'm doing making regular appearances on Fridays on News Talk 1010 with John Moore, who's a mutual friend of ours. Wendy and I are good friends with him, and I'm kind of doing it as a lark. And it may turn into a regular paid gig. But that's about the extent, Would I host a radio show? I don't think so. For all the money in the world, absolutely.
Yeah, I've got no problem with money either, but I really like being in control. And that's why I've really liked, not that I didn't have a lot of control where I was before, and not that didn't create issues where I was before. But that's what I'm enjoying about being with Maureen doing this, is that we can choose together who we want to interview instead of having to do somebody because, a bunch of kids got shot or a plane crash. Not that that's not worthy, but we can devote our lives to stuff that we figure we can make a difference. And that interests us, and we can also follow other interests. Whereas when you work in most mainstream media jobs, you have a boss and you have hours, and now
and those things suck.
Yeah, but you need that. It's good when you're younger.
Yes, younger.
Yeah, I was just gonna say we're a couple of bossy old babes here, and we don't take authority very well, and we're past the point where we appreciate being told what to do. So who'd have us, really? I mean, it would be a nightmare.
Okay, so we don't have a firm launch date, but the Women of Ill Repute, where will people be able to find it? Website, give us all the details.
Well, we're thinking June 20th.
Okay.
Right?
That's
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, June 20th.
Sure. If we can't get it off June 20th, it's not going to happen. We got to fix on the date. So yeah, June 20th. Let's say it. And so wherever you get your podcasts, go Women of Ill Repute. But our website is sort of the home.
Yes.
If you go to womenofillrepute.com or .ca, your choice. Everything you need will be there. We're launching with 3 episodes. The first one is Wendy and me talking about each other. It's if you listen back to it, it's brutal because it was our first foray, and it's like watching, 2 people dancing and they're both leading. It's awful. So if you want an example of what not to do listen to that. And then I think we can say then our episode 1 is with Mary Walsh from This Hour Is 22 Minutes, who spoke to us from St. John's. And then and these will all be available at once. And then our second episode is with Jody Wilson-Raybould. And then there will be other episodes that will drop every 2 weeks. But the website will tell you, and you can sign up for a newsletter that we have to write, Wendy, that will tell you who's coming up, and it'll be there in your inbox. But yeah, the website.
Womenofillrepute.com. And we're hoping that, the sponsors will fall out of the sky and throw bags of money at us, and that the hundreds of thousands of listeners, and we're going to be like, Joe Rogan or Smartless.
No, we're not going to be. He's like Joe Rogan, except empathetic and sensitive and intelligent.
Exactly.
Yeah, we'll just take his viewers or his number of viewers. That would be good. Yeah, I'm sure
that'll happen.
That'll be just like getting Jane Fonda.
Yeah. It'll be good. I've been listening to the episodes, and they're way better than I thought they were. How about that?
Nice.
I think they're good. So thank you for asking.
Well, when you get bags of cash and tons of sponsors, if you get too many, feel free to filter some this way, because we could use 1 or 2. The Women of Ill Repute, look forward to listening to it. This has been an absolute blast. I'm so glad that the 2 of you aren't leaving the media scene, because I'll tell you this much, it's a much better place with the 2 of you in it. Maureen Holloway and Wendy Mesley, thank you both so much for doing this today.
Thank you, Scott. It's been lovely to talk to you. You're easy to talk to, so thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And don't forget, you can find back episodes of Up Close and Personal across the Village Media Network, wherever you get your podcasts, and at upclosepodcast.ca. Thanks for watching today for Village Media. I'm Scott Sexsmith.